Chapter 1081 The returnee. With Patrick Bryan's chanting, the bones around the black casket were gradually stained with a dark green layer. They blended with the white, bringing out an extremely scary sensation. As the spirit dance became more and more intense, as though the voices from the underworld were constantly reverberating, the bones floated up one by one, as though they possessed lives of their own. Then, they were cast towards the heavy and pitch-black casket in what could be described as orderly chaos. They passed through the lid and entered as though they were incorporeal. The casket immediately transformed into a deep whirlpool that seemed like it couldn't be filled. It expanded on the spot, emitting a cold aura that was high and mighty. This made Patrick Bryan instinctively tremble and lower his head. This was an angel, the aura of a death consul. At that moment, the believers of death, the ones who were dancing spirit dance, all collapsed to the ground with their bodies left convulsing. Their consciousness became muddled, as though they were touring the underworld. And above the grey fog, with the help of his marionette's prayer points of light, the fool Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief because the leader of the numinous episcopate's artificial death faction, the angel who was sleeping in the mausoleum, the high priest Hader's test didn't exceed his expectations. Using the enslavement and control higher sequence beyonders of the death pathway had on lower sequence beyonders, he could directly obtain information from Patrick Bryan. From a certain point of view, this was an interrogation at the psyche level, something that Klein was rather proficient at dealing with. He immediately let the red priest card fly into his hand and enter his body. All of a sudden, Klein had a dark red robe draped over him. This appearance seemed to look like rust and settled gunpowder. As for his face, it was covered by a dark gold mask. The patterns on it were ancient and set off a contrasting appearance with the crown he wore that was embedded with gems that sparkled red, blue, and green. Following that, he mobilized all the powers of the mysterious space above the grey fog that he could, turning them into invisible torrents that surrounded the paper figurines he had prepared in advance. Through the prayer lights, it shot towards undying Patrick Bryan. At this moment, Patrick's body trembled slightly due to the feeling of submission he felt towards his teacher's aura, as though he could see layers of holy wings. Klein had hidden the exact appearance of the flaming angel, allowing a portion of it to be revealed. This also meant that he had interfered with the special effects. One holy wing after another enveloped Patrick before vanishing, causing him to hallucinate in confusion. As a Sequence 4 demigod, he quickly came to his senses. He realized that he no longer yearned to submit and not be able to disobey his teacher's orders. His consciousness seemed to have been pulled out of his body as he stared calmly at everything above the mind world. At the same time, as a zealot, Patrick Bryan didn't hesitate to view Angel's embrace as a gift from death. There was no doubt about it. At that moment, in the deep vortex formed from the black casket, an old and cold voice sounded out, one that could rip out a person's soul from their bodies. Not bad. Any progress in awakening God recently? Patrick Bryan followed the instructions given by the blessed, and he described his efforts and intentions in a half-truthful manner. After a series of questions and answers, the death domain angel on the other side of the vortex, Hader, didn't suspect anything. He calmly said, "Very good. Continue doing it. I will support you." He paused for a moment and nonchalantly said, "I'll send you an assistant first. A Sequence 5 gatekeeper to help you in completing the corresponding tasks to relieve your stress. Is this what His Excellency mentioned about not being at ease with me? Teacher is indeed unwilling to see me gain the favor of God and threaten his position." Having been slowly influenced by Klein through his daily communications with him, Patrick Bryan, who had slowly changed his mindset, had no way of rejecting such kind intentions. He could only answer politely, "Yes, teacher." Just as he said that, the pitch-black vortex suddenly opened up. It transformed into a mysterious pattern, conjuring up a pair of indescribable double bronze doors. With a creaking sound, the door opened and a crack widened. There was still darkness behind the rift, and there seemed to be eyes hidden in the depths of the darkness, quietly watching the outside. At that moment, a palm stretched out and rested on the door crack. Its skin was rather pale, allowing one to see the blue blood veins underneath. With a tug, a figure leaped out of the door. This was a young, tall man wearing a black robe with red linings with his hood pulled up. His facial features were gentle, and his skin was slightly brown. It was obvious at a glance that he was from a southern continent bloodline. He was rather handsome, but he looked anemic. Stepping on the solid ground beneath his feet, the young man didn't even glance at Patrick Bryan. He raised his head and looked into the sky. The corners of his mouth curled up as he narrowed his eyes and sighed. This intoxicating atmosphere, as a beyonder of the death pathway, to be ignored by someone whose sequence was lower than his, there was no doubt that Patrick Bryan was a little angry, but in front of his teacher, he had no choice but to follow the flow and end the ritual. During this process, the fool's response above the grey fog was even more intense than Patrick's. Because through the grey fog's true vision, he could see the abnormality of the new gatekeeper. The gatekeeper's internal underworld expanded in an odd manner, covering every part of his body. And there was only one soul in the underworld, a young and handsome soul with red hair, signs of rotting on its face, and a flag mark on its glabella. It wore black blood-stained armor. Klein wasn't unfamiliar with this soul, for he immediately recognized it, the Red Angel evil spirit, Sauron Einhorn Medici. This fellow has returned to Backlund again, and had a certain working relationship with the Angel of the Numinous Episcopate's artificial death faction. Klein instinctively took out the Red Priest card and accommodated the Tyrant card before summoning the Sea God Scepter. He planned on giving the Red Angel evil spirit a zap of lightning storm, but as his thoughts raced, he restrained this impulse and gave up on the corresponding thoughts. This would expose Patrick Bryan's problem and let the angel from the death domain guess that something had happened to artificial death. This wasn't beneficial to the Evernight goddess's control and digestion of the death pathway's uniqueness. Amidst his thoughts, he quickly left the world above the grey fog and returned to the real world. He made his marionette secretly leave the clothing factory and teleport away with his body. He had originally planned on creating a shocking experience for Patrick Bryan after the ritual. He had even made some preparations beforehand. Now, he could only give up to prevent the Red Angel evil spirit from discovering him. Inside the clothing factory, the young gatekeeper, who had been possessed by Sauron Einhorn Medici, pulled his hood even lower before turning his head slightly and looking in a particular direction outside. That was the spot where Klein's marionette, Konas Kilgore, had been hiding, nearly a kilometer away from the factory. After staring at it for a few seconds, the young gatekeeper revealed an obvious smile. Just as Patrick Bryan was about to say something, planning to use his identity of the person in charge of the Numinous Episcopate's artificial death faction to haze the envoy of his teacher, his spiritual perception was triggered. He turned around in a bizarre manner, casting his gaze on another building in the factory. On the second floor of the building, behind a glass window in a room, there was a pair of emotionless black eyes staring at them. Patrick Bryan's eyelids twitched, and his body suddenly vanished. Woo! A cold wind blew, causing the glass window to rot silently. Without any movement, it crumbled into countless snowflakes. In the corresponding room, a skinny Patrick in a black robe and a thin face emerged. He saw that the master of that pair of cold, black eyes was a rough mud doll. Who made the doll? Who moved it here? Patrick Bryan looked around cautiously, not missing any corners. Just as he turned his gaze towards the corridor and faced the glass window with his body slanted, the crude, black eyes of the mud doll suddenly turned. Then, it raised its hands and grabbed Patrick's neck. Halfway through the action, the mud doll seemed to lose its support and lost all mobility. Many cracks appeared on its surface as it instantly shattered into pieces. Patrick Bryan's figure disappeared first before he appeared in the corridor, staring at the collapsed doll as if he was facing a most powerful enemy. At that moment, he had really jumped in fright. Although there were all sorts of bizarre and harrowing matters related to spirits, it was still quite scary for a puppet to suddenly come alive without the influence of an external spirit body. The mud doll lay there quietly in fragments without so much as a stir. Patrick Bryan waited patiently for a while before finally confirming that there were no more abnormalities. He shuttled through the spirit world once again and returned to the place where the ritual had been held. At that moment, the heavy, pitch-black casket had completely decayed. It was as if it had been buried in the ground for centuries, if not millennia. And the surrounding underworld believers were slowly recovering from their semi-conscious state. Patrick Bryan looked around but could not find the young gatekeeper sent by his teacher. He didn't know when he had left. Isn't he here to spy on me? The demigod of the death pathway was at a loss. Taking into consideration the abnormal discovery he had made, the living mud doll, Patrick Bryan didn't delay any further. He quickly snapped his followers awake and cleaned up the scene and removed all traces. After he was done, he suddenly heard a voice, "Is this clothing factory yours?" Patrick Bryan's figure instantly disappeared and appeared again, now facing the person who spoke. That was the young gatekeeper who had gone somewhere. No. Patrick frowned slightly. How could he do such a thing in his own factory? If he was exposed, wouldn't there be no way out? Not too stupid, the young gatekeeper nodded gently. Patrick narrowed his eyes and suppressed his anger. Where did you go? The young gatekeeper chuckled and said, I visited some familiar spots and met a friend. Chapter 1082 Sudden turn of events 160 Buckland Street, inside Dwayne Dantes' mansion. After teleporting back, Klein didn't delay at all. He immediately set up an altar and held a ritual to pray to death. You are the essence of death, you are the Lord of the dead, you are the final home to all living beings. I pray for your help. I pray that you will know how to resolve the problem of the Red Angel evil spirit. He has possessed the body of a gatekeeper and is cooperating with the numinous episcopate's high priest, Hader. He has come to Buckland and been made an assistant to Patrick Bryan. With regard to this matter, there was really no choice but to seek help from the Evernight goddess. Ignoring the possibility of seeking out the ascetic leader, Ariana, in a cooperation effort, or whether he had the ability to get finish off Sauron Einhorn Medici, even if he could, once the Red Angel evil spirit disappeared, the numinous episcopate's artificial death faction's high priest would immediately understand that something major had happened here. He could then connect it to other abnormalities and determine that there was something wrong with artificial death's condition. Then, using his own level and status, possible sealed artifacts, and his familiarity with the pathway, he might be able to create mutually harmful acts of destruction. And if he ignored the Red Angel, this evil spirit who was a conspirer wouldn't take long to detect something abnormal with Patrick Bryan. With his knowledge and intelligence, it wasn't difficult to guess the nature of the problem. No matter how I deal with it, it'll be a problem. As expected of an angel in the war domain. Even if he is a 3-in-1 spirit body, he can still create unresolvable problems for others. This must have actually been an idea that he gave Hader. Actually, I do have an extreme idea, that is to let the Red Angel evil spirit be killed by other churches, official organizations, or secret organizations for another whole different matter. In short, anything related to the goddess cannot come center stage. Things must be made very clear. The difficulty with this approach is how to let an extremely experienced, high-ranking member of the conspiring domain fall into a trap. If I don't handle it well, it might backfire on me. After the prayer ended, Klein casually let his thoughts wander as he waited patiently for the Evernight goddess to give him a response. After more than 10 seconds, the herbal dregs that pleased the deity were swept up by an invisible wind. They flew out and landed on the table, forming words, his coming spells the raising of arms. What does that mean? Looking at the sentence that gave him a sense of déjà vu, he frowned slightly. As a seer, he habitually interpreted it, due to the king's problem, Lone has fallen into the shadows of war. Hence, the Red Angel that symbolizes war came. This means that it might no longer be possible to stop the war. Upon reaching sequence 1, one would become a symbol of certain phenomena. As these thoughts flashed through Klein's mind, the invisible wind came to a stop. The altar, which was completely isolated by the wall of spirituality, turned extremely silent. There are no other revelations. After waiting for a while, Klein confirmed that this was all, so he ended the ritual and cleared the altar. He then walked to the sofa in the room and sat down to see if anything else would happen. After a full 15 minutes, he didn't usher in the arrival of the matron of the Evernight cloister, the leader of the 13 archbishops, Angel of Concealment, Ariana. I don't have to deal with the Red Angel evil spirit, and I should just leave him be. Or, there's another solution, but my involvement isn't needed. In essence, he wasn't a devout believer of Evernight. Since the goddess said that he didn't need to bother about it, he naturally couldn't be bothered to do so. After all, this matter was not only extremely troublesome for him, but it was also extremely dangerous. Shaking his head, Klein took out a pen and paper from his pocket and began a dream divination. What had happened tonight made him feel that he couldn't waste any time. He had to digest the Bizarro Sorcerer potion as soon as possible. Above the fog sea, inside a steam-powered merchant ship that was extremely close to a pirate ship. One by one, the men and older women were tied up and pushed to the edge of the deck. Then, the pirates either used their hands or legs to throw them into the sea. The splashing sounds didn't affect the pirates at all, guffawing over this bloodless massacre. After clearing the captives, they carried their guns and lanterns to the shipboard, preparing to enjoy the pitiful bugs struggling. However, under the light, the dark blue sea beside the boat quietly undulated. No one was there. They sank so quickly, a pirate blurted out in surprise. The leader of this pirate crew frowned. After looking at it for a while, he said, "Perhaps some sea monsters passed by and treated those who dared resist us as food bestowed by the gods. Perfect timing. If we feed it, it won't attack us." Upon saying this, the leader waved his hand. "Everyone, enjoy yourselves." As a fairly experienced pirate, he knew that there were many strange things at sea. It was best not to seek out the reason and try to figure out the truth. Since it didn't harm him or his crew, he would thank the Lord of Storms for his blessings, doing so as though nothing had happened. After making sure that there were people on duty, the pirates began gulping down copious amounts of alcohol, ate huge chunks of meat, and sang loudly, and fought for the rights to the young female captives. In the noisy and lively atmosphere, the pirate leader led a beautiful passenger that he had long taken a liking to into the captain's room. He eagerly began the final process for that night of revelry. In the middle of the night, the tired pirate leader stretched out his right hand and touched something cold. He jolted awake. Through the crimson moonlight shining through the window, he saw a piece of coarse wood in his arms. A series of branches with green leaves grew out from the wooden block, hugging him like a human's limbs. "Pa!" The pirate leader's pupils rapidly dilated. As he pushed away the wood, jumped off the bed, and stumbled back. Was I with such a thing previously? His mind was filled with terror. He couldn't care less about his clothes, picking up a flintlock and cutlass before leaving the room immediately. Outside, there was a pirate on duty. "How can I be happy to steal your ear?" When the pirate saw his leader open the door, he quickly asked. The pirate leader had originally wanted to chide the other party for secretly drinking, resulting in his incoherence. However, when he looked up, he saw that his subordinate's mouth and his surroundings were filled with golden grains. Even the surface of his tongue was covered in dense clusters. The pirate leader's scalp tightened as he felt a numbing chill run down his spine. At this moment, the door across the corridor opened as well. A pirate shouted with a sobbing tone, "Oh no! Boss, I have a lot of mushrooms growing there." As he spoke, the pirate ran out. At the same time, he felt his eyes itch. He raised his hand and rubbed his right eye. As he rubbed his eyes, a green vine slowly grew out from the gaps between his eye socket and his eyeball. There was a dark red grape at the end of it. The flesh around the grape was a blur. The pirate leader's body froze when he saw this. He asked in a voice that didn't belong to him, "What did you guys encounter?" While rubbing his eye, the pirates who didn't notice the problem said without any recollection, "A pole-like shadow struck me." Yu, the pirate whose tongue was covered in golden wheat echoed. He was blocked by his leader and didn't see his fellow crew members' terrifying appearance. The pirate leader's legs began to shake uncontrollably. He instinctively turned around and ran out of the cabin. At this moment, he saw a long wall that looked like a shadow from a pole rapidly sweep towards him before lashing out at him. The shadow flashed and soon disappeared. It was as though it was a surreal nightmare. The pirate leader was just a beat slower before he subconsciously raised his hand to block. This was obviously not effective. Then, he looked at himself in panic and didn't find anything unusual. Thankfully, the pirate leader couldn't help but let out a sigh. Before he could finish, he suddenly heard a slightly muffled voice. Thankfully, this voice seemed to come from his body. The pirate leader's pupils dilated to the extreme as he involuntarily lifted up his clothes. He then saw 3 cracks appear between his chest, 1 big, 2 small. 2 rows of white teeth were neatly arranged in the large crack, and in the middle of the small crack were 2 lively and nimble eyeballs embedded in them. It was a mouth and 2 eyes. The pirate leader had a mouth and 2 eyes on his chest. No! A scream rang out from the boat, filled with indescribable terror. In the next 15 minutes, some of the pirates went mad and killed their companions. Some successfully escaped back to their own ship, only to discover that the people on it had also turned mutated. Hence, they jumped into the sea in despair. By the time everything calmed down, there were only about 10 normal pirates slumped on the deck and hiding in their rooms. There was a stench around them. After a while, passengers came out of the cabin one after another. They looked at the scene in front of them in disbelief. They either thanked the gods or stood there in a daze. It was early in the morning. Klein got out of bed and began to wash up. Just as he was changing his clothes with the help of his valet, Anuni, he saw butler Walter, who had just returned from a leave of absence, walk to the door and say, "Sir, Bishop Electra is here to pay a visit. Let him wait for me in the activity room where he can enjoy a cigar." Klein hesitated for a moment before saying. He suspected that this was a late response from the goddess. Walter immediately turned around and went downstairs to make the arrangements. Before long, he returned and said, "Sir, Bishop Electra has already bade farewell and left. He wanted me to tell you that you must go to St. Samuel Cathedral in the morning. He said that the church and the government are going to hold an air raid drill together." Air raid drill? Klein frowned. At that moment, his spiritual perception was triggered. He turned around and looked out the window. In the air, there were rows of dark brown-colored airships approaching. These airships had slanted patterns of red, white, and yellow emblems. This was the flag of Faisac. Upon seeing this scene, Klein suddenly understood what he had overlooked. War might not be initiated by the Lone Kingdom. An ancient and hidden organization definitely had very high-ranking members in other countries. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been able to affect the world situation. Although the Sonia Sea wasn't like the Fog Sea, with it often being filled with fog, the northern regions would occasionally fill up with a rather thick fog every autumn and winter morning. Alger Wilson's Blue Avenger was sailing in such an environment, following the borders of the Sonia Island back to the lone coast. He had already spent too long in the North Sonia Sea, so he needed to return for a routine report. Within the pale white fog, the ghost ship quietly proceeded forward, occasionally appearing like a dream that didn't leave any traces. Alger was wrapped by the wind as he stood in midair in front of the window, admiring the white world outside. He allowed his thoughts to wander in different directions. Suddenly, his eyes focused as some silvery white light flashed in his pupils. He saw a large sail through the fog in the distance, and a massive ship silently cruised past. This ship wasn't alone. Behind it were several similar ships. 1, 2, 3, they formed a fleet that spanned a great distance. Faisac's Sonia Sea Fleet. They've all been mobilized. Where are they heading to? Alger's feet landed on the deck. His gaze immediately turned to the other side, where Sonia Island was located. After the various exchanges at the Tarot Club, Alger was already certain that the world situation was tense, with war about to break out at any moment. At that moment, he made some connections and made a guess. To the Faesac Empire and the Lone Kingdom, Sonia Island was extremely important. If it were occupied by the Lone Kingdom, Faesac's eastern naval fleet would be completely blocked off in the cold north, unable to vie for any of the various colonies in the Sonia Sea or head to East Balam. Meanwhile, after waging war, if they wanted to threaten the Lone Kingdom's hinterlands, they would have to cross the Amantha mountain range or cross the mid-seashore, passing through the defenses of several counties. That would be extremely difficult. And if Sonia Island was conquered by the Faesac Empire, then they could use that as a base to attack all the ports in the north and central regions of Lone, including but not limited to Enmat Harbor or Pritz Harbor. If the Faesac commander was more daring and unfazed by the losses, he could even be able to directly target the capital of the Lone Kingdom, Baklund, which was not far from the port. It was precisely because of this that the two countries had waged the 20-year war. The Faesac Empire clinched victory, and they had obtained the crucial southern path. In the Battle of the Violated Oath, Lone had won the war but had failed to regain this territory. Its strategic goals for the war were only half achieved. Alger stared at this scene for a moment before speaking in a serious tone, "Is war about to erupt?" In Baklund, a large number of airships from Faesac had entered from Northborough and arrived above the huge city. As soon as they drew near, the Holy Wind Cathedral seemed to have made certain precautions. The howling of the wind intensified, turning into several giant bluish-black blades that whistled towards the target like surface-to-air missiles. Seeing that the huge blades were about to hit the airbags of the airship, an invisible layer of defense appeared and shielded it from all the attacks. Under the violent strike, the transparent wall shook, but ultimately managed to hold on. At the same time, the compartment for guns, projectile launchers, and cannons of the airship opened up and aimed downwards. Boom! As a hurricane around the Holy Wind Cathedral took form, a loud explosive boom emanated in every direction. In such a terrifying storm, the airships were like boats sailing through the sea where they met mountain-like waves and were about to be tossed into the distance. At that moment, the blood and rust-like beams of light flashed on the leading airship. They enveloped all the other accompanying airships and connected them together. Suddenly, Faesac's airship fleet had stabilized in the hurricane and was no longer a puny boat in the gigantic waves. The power of the high-level Red Priest pathway belonged to war, and war was the art of gathering the masses. This was the authority of a war bishop. After the Phaeacians blocked this wave of attacks, they took advantage of the gap in between the wave of attacks to deliver their bombs through the hatches and allow them to drop beneath them. And in the hurricane, the trajectories of the bombs became unpredictable. Boom! Boom! The cannon hatches also lit up and showed off their prowess that would honor the god of war. This airship fleet didn't attempt to travel through Baklund. After entering Northborough, it immediately turned to Westborough, the center of politics for the Lone Kingdom. Northborough, Baklund University of Technology. The withered Intis parasol tree leaves swayed in the wind. Students were either carrying books or bags as they walked around the campus. As a member of an institute of higher education, as the first batch of students of this reorganized university, these young adults were full of vigor. They looked forward to their future and would gather together every day to discuss their ideals, recite poems, and research technology. They were pure and happy. Melissa Moretti walked amidst them as she raised her head to look at the wall clock at the top of the main teaching building and involuntarily hastened her pace. She had to go to Chancellor Moment's office today to prepare for the upcoming mechanical laboratory that was to be officially launched. This was something that she enjoyed greatly, something which made her feel happy every day. She felt that life on campus was so wonderful and that her classmates were so adorable. Subconsciously, Melissa looked at the steam locomotive in the middle of the square. Its massive, complicated body was displaying its infinite charm in the machinery industry. Quite a number of students liked to gather there, knocking, hitting, and analyzing its structure. As for the school, it didn't encourage or forbid it. The corners of Melissa's lips curled into a smile as she moved to look away. Suddenly, a metallic gray object descended from the sky and landed in the middle of the square. Boom! The ground shook violently as all the windows of the main teaching building shattered. If not for the distance, Melissa might have been thrown up by the blast of air. Countless screams rang out, and like the other students, Melissa fled in panic, not knowing what had happened. She was only 16 years old after all, she had never experienced such a scene before. The billowing dust and smoke gradually fell. After hiding behind a tree, Melissa subconsciously looked at the spot where the explosion had just occurred. Her expression instantly froze, and her eyes glazed over. The steam locomotive's head was already in pieces, its components and fragments were scattered everywhere. The students around it, and those passing by, had already collapsed to the ground, their bodies no longer intact. They were no longer breathing. Some of them were covered in blood, others charred. There were some moaning in pain. This scene was like an oil painting that wasn't realistic enough. Melissa stared at it in a daze, momentarily at a loss for a reaction. Carter, she knew that male student who had a great spirit for research. Every time everyone was in discussion, he would confidently say that he was going to be a ship engineer. Now, he only had half his lower body left, and his intestines were all over the ground. Eudora, she was a student from the same faculty as her. Despite studying machinery, she loved poetry very much and was rather talented in this aspect. She was loved by the people around her. Sometimes, Melissa would also attend their gatherings and quietly listen to Eudora's recital. She felt that this girl was really attractive, but now, her leg was badly mutilated, and she was moaning half-consciously in pain. In just a few seconds, these people's future had been cruelly changed. It was only when many teachers rushed out of the teaching block and started to rescue the injured and evacuate the students that Melissa woke up from her trance and hurriedly moved closer to the teachers. Listen to me. All of you are to split up into two groups. One batch will head to the laboratories, and the other to Tiffany Cathedral. They all have an underground area that you can hide in. One of the teachers wore a look of terror, but he still held his breath and made arrangements with his clear voice as though he had been specially trained. He looked around and saw that the students didn't dare to leave the teachers. He hurriedly said, "Don't worry. The enemy's airship has already turned and gone to Westboro. There's no danger here." His words were accompanied by a rumbling explosion that came from the southwest. Westboro. The kingdom's parliament, various departments, and municipal halls are there. Upon hearing the teacher's words, Melissa immediately thought of many things. As the light in her eyes flickered, she suddenly pursed her lips tightly and ran towards the school gate, ignoring her teacher calling from behind. As she moved along a sheltered area, Melissa quickly arrived on the streets. She panted heavily and looked around, trying to get her bearings. At that moment, she saw the subway entrance nearby. Although she was flustered, she still remembered what the teacher had just said. Underground area that you can hide in. Isn't the subway underground? The bombing has just started, and the subway probably hadn't stopped moving. As her thoughts raced, Melissa rushed towards the entrance that showed signs of bombardment. Upon going underground, she realized that the people here weren't as many as she had expected. Most ordinary people who had never been trained wouldn't think of hiding in here immediately. The subway had indeed not stopped moving, but no one was checking the tickets. After a short wait, Melissa ran over, her lips tightly pursed and her face filled with anxiety. After 3 stops, the subway stopped at Kings Avenue. Melissa squeezed through the crowd and rushed out of the carriage. She had already recovered her stamina. She ran along the stairs, her speed increasing ever so slightly before she quickly reached the surface. At this moment, whatever she could see was in a state of chaos. Many buildings had collapsed as they were burning in scarlet flames. Broken limbs, blood, and the dead were everywhere. She could hear cries, screams, and orders. Upon seeing this scene, Melissa became even more anxious as she tried to run towards the four-story building where the kingdom's Ministry of Finance was located. However, the area had already been sealed. She could see that many window panes had shattered. The walls were riddled with bullet holes, and there were still traces of an explosion. Melissa tried to enter the perimeter but was stopped by the soldiers who were maintaining order. This only served to increase her anxiety as her eyes reddened. At this moment, she saw a familiar figure. It was the black-haired, brown-eyed Benson who wasn't wearing a hat. Upon seeing Melissa, Benson immediately rushed over. He looked anxious and angry as he shouted, "Why are you here? Why aren't you hiding underground? I'm very safe here. Quick, follow me there. Didn't you not go underground either?" Melissa, who had never been shouted at by her brother, wanted to instinctively retort, but her vision was already blurry. Phew. After he shouted, he let out a breath and softened his tone. "It's good that you're okay. Quick, don't wander around on the streets." Upon hearing his words, the panic and concern in Melissa's heart calmed down. At this moment, she felt that even if she were to die, it wouldn't be that scary anymore. At least, she wouldn't be the only one left at home. At this moment, a bomb was blown over by a hurricane and was landing towards the area. But suddenly, the bomb changed directions abruptly and flew off horizontally. Boom! It exploded in midair, only stirring up a blast of air. Chapter 1084 The People in War. Boom! Boom! In the building at Sherwood Burrows 17, Minsk Street, the female owner of the building, Stellan Sammer, and her maidservants heard a loud explosion from afar. She fearfully hid in a corner of the room, feeling as though the ground beneath her feet was trembling. Only after the constant, terrifying commotion started to fade away did she straighten her body and look left and right with an unusually strained mind. What exactly happened? The two maidservants simultaneously shook their heads. They were both at a loss and also afraid. As soon as she left the corner of the room, she instinctively wanted to walk out of the room and talk to her neighbors to figure out what had just happened. However, she was worried that another attack would happen again, so she had no choice but to pace around in the living room. After a few minutes, she suddenly heard the sound of the door opening. She quickly turned her head and realized that her husband, Luke Sammer, had returned with his valet. "Aren't you working?" Stellan asked subconsciously. The stout Luke replied solemnly, "I happened to pass by the vicinity and came back immediately." "Quick, put on your coat. Let's go to the cathedral now." "What happened? What happened?" Stellan asked again. Luke took 2 steps forward and said, "Faceax airships are bombarding Backlund." "How? How could this be?" Stellan's eyes widened in disbelief. "Now is not the time to discuss this. Whatever it is, it has already happened. We have to go to the cathedral immediately." Luke gave his wife a hug. "Don't worry too much. I think those airships aren't heading over." All right, Stellan replied in a panic. As she wore the coat the maidservant had brought over, she instinctively said with concern, "What about the children? They're at the church's school, so there will be people who will arrange for them to take shelter." "We don't have the time to reach them," Luke said calmly. "All right." Stellan made a prayer gesture, hoping that the deity she believed in would provide them with protection. The two of them, along with their male and female servants, quickly exited their house and walked towards the other end of the street. As she passed by Unit 58, Stellan took a glance and whispered, "Previously, I had laughed at Lawyer Jürgen, saying that he gave up a lot of opportunities in Backlund from moving to the south just because of Mrs. Doris's ailments. Now, I'm starting to envy him." Luke shot her a look and said, "Don't worry too much. It'll be fine." While walking quickly, Stellan couldn't help but ask, "Luke, are we fleeing Backlund?" No, there's no need. Luke Sammer answered firmly. This was just an accident. Seeing that his wife was clearly confused, he added, Backlund is the capital of the kingdom, so it has to be the most well-defended area. This time, it was just an oversight that no one expected. The next time, the Phasacians won't have another chance. The kingdom has the strongest military in the northern and southern continents. The Phasacians will definitely be taught a lesson. There's no way they can invade Backlund again. After this, Backlund will definitely be the safest place to be. I see. Stellan felt that her husband's words made sense, and she was willing to believe him. After the explanation, Luke fell silent for a few seconds. However, we still have to make some preparations. Once the church announces that we can move freely, we'll immediately fetch the children back and buy more food. We'll buy as much as we can. Inside a public school in the Backlund Bridge area. Due to the distance, Daisy and her classmates didn't realize what had happened in the north and west boroughs, nor did they sense the chaos that had spread from Hillston Borough to Cherwood Borough. However, teachers still came to their classrooms and arranged for them to line up to head to the nearest cathedral. This made Daisy recall the great smog of Backlund last year. Back then, they had also been asked to hide in the cathedral beside the school. Did something similar happen again? The trauma in Daisy's heart made her tremble slightly as she felt intense sadness and anger. When she passed by the door, she couldn't help but turn her head to look at the teacher in charge and ask, is it another disaster? Maybe, the teacher didn't know the details and had only followed the orders sent by a telegram. Is there a disaster like this every year, or maybe even more than one? Daisy asked with a slightly ethereal voice with a tinge of innocence. The teacher looked at her with pity and shook his head. All difficulties will pass. God will protect everyone. Daisy didn't waste his time and followed the crowd to the nearest cathedral in a somewhat blank manner. North Borough, 22, Phelps Street. After hearing the explosion inside the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation, the first thing Audrey did was to conceal her dragon scales before rushing to the window. Seeing the airships with the Phasac flag appearing in the air and the bombs being carried away by a hurricane and being thrown into the distance, either landing on the ground and exploding or disappearing as though they had entered the spirit world, a thought flashed across her mind, the words that the world Mr. Gehrman Sparrow had said, as well as the mission of the psychology alchemists. She came to a realization: war had truly erupted. She immediately turned her head and said to the huge golden retriever, Susie, her personal lady's maid, Annie, and the others, quick, hide in St. Samuel Cathedral. Although Audrey didn't know how to deal with an air raid, the education she received from a young age told her to go to a cathedral as soon as possible if she ever encountered danger. In fact, she instinctively wanted to rush back to Empress Borough to protect her mother. However, considering that Annie, the other servants, and staff were ordinary people who lacked experience and the ability to deal with Sioux Carrot crisis, she had no choice but to take care of them and accompany them to St. Samuel Cathedral. In order to resolve any dangers that she might encounter along the way, she planned to put on hand of horror and lie. On the one hand, she could distort the trajectory of bullets, while on the other hand, she could control flames and trigger the bombs in advance. In the face of long-range attacks, the beyonder powers of the spectator pathway were indeed not effective. While secretly protecting her servants and the Foundation staff, she successfully entered St. Samuel Cathedral and saw a few bishops and priests approaching her. Miss Audrey, you don't have to worry about the Earl and his wife, as well as Lord Hibbert. They have people to protect them. An air raid like this won't harm them. Besides, you also know how grand your family basement is and how strong it is. One of the bishops quickly brought her to the side to console her. After taking off her fishnet gloves, she nodded and acknowledged the words of the bishop. She was no longer in a hurry to return home and instead asked, "What's the current situation like?" "The Phasacians have lost 2 airships and have moved towards West Borough. Don't worry, all the defenses have been mustered. They won't cause any further damage." After a simple exchange of words, the bishop led Audrey's group towards the underground area of the cathedral. And further below was where the Nighthawks were active. 160, Buckland Street. Butler Walter and a group of servants hid in an underground area which was used as a wine cellar. This was done under Dwayne Dantes' orders, and this gentleman had headed out to find Bishop Electra with his valet. After an unknown period of time, Walter and company heard a knock on the door. Through the peephole, they confirmed that their employer had returned. "There aren't any more raids now, but it's best you hide at St. Samuel Cathedral for a while," Klein said as he surveyed the area. "Yes, sir," Walter replied on behalf of the servants before asking, "And after that?" As a qualified butler, he often read the papers and understood that the situation was tense. It wasn't difficult to guess that a war would break out after the explosions. Klein thought for a moment before saying, "Once the church has verified the situation, we'll head to Mager Manor. You can bring your family along. No matter what, the capital of the kingdom is definitely a relatively safe place. And the manor at the periphery of the capital definitely wouldn't be a target of air raids, as it's of no value. Yes, there's enough food in Mager Manor, and there's a large supply of wine. Even if the war were to be extended for a long time, we won't have to worry about starving to death." Upon hearing the employer's words, the servants who had already formed a family immediately revealed looks of delight, wiping away their pale looks of fear. Walter expressed his gratitude directly. He said with some deliberation, "You can buy more food. Under such circumstances, no one will find it excessive. Also, there might not be any more attacks near Backlund, but I can't say the same for security. The manor outside the city must be on guard." Klein nodded. "I've also considered this. I'll discuss this with Member of Parliament Mocht and military personnel about purchasing a batch of decommissioned weapons and bullets. You must practice more. Anyway, during this period of time, Enuni and I will return to Backlund to handle certain matters according to the situation. If there's anything I haven't considered, I'll make up for it later." As for the food, he didn't forbid Butler Walter from buying it. This way, if a famine really happened, he would have the ability to save them. After discussing the follow-up procedures, everyone in the residence of Dwayne Dantes packed up their luggage and brought their valuables. They followed their employer into St. Samuel Cathedral and arrived underground. With a single glance, he saw Audrey walking amidst the people, placating their moods. He smiled and nodded at her. Upon seeing Dwayne Dantes, Audrey smiled back and confirmed that nothing major had happened from his attitude. Furs and Zio had moved again, but they were still at the borders of East Borough, and they were even closer to the Backlund Bridge area. After waking up naturally, Furs rubbed her hair and walked out of the bedroom to prepare lunch. As she looked around, she saw Zio, who had gone out early, sitting on a chair and flipping through the newspapers. "What's wrong?" Furs asked blankly. Zio frowned and said, "The Phasacians' air raids bombed North and West Borough." "What?" Furs first blurted out before recalling the matters that had been discussed at the Tarot Club. At that moment, a paperboy's voice came from outside. "Extra! Extra! The kingdom declares war on Phasac. Extra! Extra! The kingdom declares war on Phasac." Chapter 1085 Scrutinizing the Situation. Extra! Extra! The kingdom declares war on Phasac. On the way from Mager Manor to Backlund, Klein heard the paperboy shouting on the streets with brisk steps while on a horse carriage. Although he had already made preparations, he still sighed after confirming that the war had truly erupted. He couldn't help but feel depressed again. The grudge from having Sonia Island, a key territory, taken away. The conflict over the rights of the colonies. The defeat from the previous war. The political corruption leading to a recession. Ever since the repeal of the Grain Act, many farmers of the kingdom have gone bankrupt due to the importing of foreign food products. The lower class live in abject conditions. The rich-poor divide only grew deeper, the middle class's blind confidence in the lone kingdom's might, and the eager desire to raise their own positions. The intensifying conflict between different political factions in high society leading to a fracture. The king and his faction wish for a large-scale war. With all these factors combined, just from an objective standpoint, and considering this from the angle of materialism, it's almost inevitable for Lone to start a war. Reality is the best author. Jumping out from his experience from the past, Klein scrutinized the Lone Kingdom situation from a fresh point of view. He realized that the tides of the times had already formed and were surging over. Without a true deity's descent, it was completely unstoppable. In comparison, what puzzled him more was why the Faisak Empire would be willing to initiate a war. Even if the members of an ancient secret organization were indeed members of the upper echelons of Faisak or the Church of the God of Combat, key figures who had the right to make the decision, there was no way they could be alone in deciding such an important matter. How could the others agree to a world war? Could it be that the conflict between the various classes in the Faisak Empire has also completely escalated to the point that it urgently needs a war? With his lack of understanding of the Empire of the North, it was difficult for Klein to make an accurate judgment. But they just won the East Balam War and reaped more of the rights to the colonies. There's no reason for its situation to be more serious than Lone's. Yes, the royal family, the Einhorn family, is in control of the Red Priest pathway. It's understandable that they crave war, but the Church of the God of Combat has no reason not to stop it. As a member of the Orthodox Deity Alliance, they lacked the motivation to help Amon's brother advance to Sequence 0. Thinking of this, Klein suddenly came up with a theory. Did that brother of Amon realize that the goddess has already acquired the uniqueness of the death pathway and is in a critical stage, so he revealed this information to the Church of the God of Combat? And the God of Combat is in a neighboring pathway with the goddess, so there's no way he can ignore this matter. He will definitely make an intense response. Of course, it might not be done by the brother of Amon. It might also be because of the numinous episcopate's artificial death faction's angel, Hader. After being warned by Einham Sauron Medici, this conspirer expert, he discovered the abnormalities ahead of time. On the one hand, he pretends not to notice anything and continues to set up a probe. On the other hand, he pulled in the Church of the God of Combat to worsen the situation and make it more chaotic. The Red Angel evil spirit is truly a symbol of war. If this is really the case, then it's inevitable for Faisak to wage this war. Furthermore, the matter regarding the uniqueness of the death pathway has no room for compromise. At the critical moment, the God of Combat might descend, causing a battle of gods that hasn't happened since the end of the Fourth Epoch to happen. This time, for the airship fleet from Faisak could stealthily to travel from the coast for nearly 100 kilometers without being detected, it would definitely have a weather warlock providing protection. Otherwise, even if they were to take a detour across places with few people, they'll still be seen ahead of time and definitely be stopped by the lone airships. A weather warlock is an angel. Since the Fifth Epoch, the number of wars that have Beyonders at this level are few and far between. After Emperor Rosel's death, most soldiers don't even know of Beyonders, even in the colonial wars. To have a weather warlock be involved in this means, this is really a battle that will sweep through the entire world. It involves battles at all levels. Is this what Amon's brother wants? When the time comes, the Lord of Storms, the eternal blazing sun, the Earth Mother, the God of steam and machinery, the God of knowledge and wisdom will have to take their respective stances. Would the conflicts that they have temporarily suppressed for almost 2,000 years be escalated? Earth Mother likes the giants, and even amongst her blessed, they are Phasacians. And because of the splitting of Lenberg, Mason, and Seeger, these made the Fainapotter kingdom bear a bone-deep grudge with the Lone Kingdom and Intis. The king's powers and the divine powers are highly likely to be unified, and they might form an alliance with Faisak. From the south to the north, they will attack Lone and Intis. Of course, countries like Lenberg and the Church of Knowledge, who are in the crossfire, will definitely try to stop it. As for Desi Bey, Fainapotter, and the Lone Kingdom are directly connected, the South wouldn't be peaceful either. The more Klein thought about it, the more he felt that the situation in the northern continent would become abnormally chaotic. And no matter what direction it developed into, he couldn't stop it. Even if he were a Sequence 4 demigod, under the tide of the times, there was no way for him to cause any major impact in this battle of gods, or exert any key influence. It would be pretty good if he could protect himself and the people he cared about. Previously, when the Fasak air fleet attacked, the first thing he did was arrange for Butler Walter and company to hide in the underground area that was used as a wine cellar. Then, he teleported to Backlund University of Technology. At that time, a bomb had already hit the ground. Some had died, and others were injured. The only thing he was thankful for was that his sister, Melissa, wasn't within the vicinity of the explosion. By the time Melissa and Benson met, the airships from Fasak didn't stay for long and quickly retreated from Backlund. Only then did he return to Dwayne Dantes' residence. Phew, Klein let out a slow sigh of relief. He turned his head to look out the window and saw that, after hearing that the kingdom was declaring war on Fasak, a small number of pedestrians on the street wore a look of horror as though they had recalled the air raid in the morning. Most of them wore blank expressions with a look of panic. They had no idea what they could do even if they wanted to. They might not have truly understood what this war would bring, but they instinctively felt that peace had been broken. The future was a chaotic mess, fraught with danger. Klein retracted his gaze and looked at his valet, Anuni, who was sitting opposite him. From his eyes, he realized that he was somewhat at a loss. He gave a half-smile and sighed. He raised his hand to rub his temples and wiped away his depressed and helpless feelings. He thought about what he could do and what he needed to take note of. No matter what, with this experience and lesson, the king's faction has had a war spark out as they wished. Before all of Lone collapses, it's nearly impossible for Fasak to invade Backlund again. It would be safer for Benson and Melissa to stay here. What's most worrisome is the lack of food and various assassinations. The latter is nothing. The place where Melissa and Benson live in is decided by their own levels. They aren't anywhere close to coming into contact with someone important who is a target for assassination, so they won't be implicated. Fortunately, Portland Moments Research Laboratory has just been established, and there are no results from it yet. It won't become a target that must be destroyed. As for the former, I can provide some help through Miss Audrey. The Winter County at the Holy Cathedral is located in the far north reaches of the kingdom, next to Fasak. It's always the front line of every war. Ma'am Ariana might have returned to help the military. Oh, she might also be sent elsewhere to protect the coast. After all, the defenses of Backlund are sufficient. The royal family definitely has grade 0 sealed artifacts and also angels. The three churches most likely have hidden tricks up their sleeves. In that case, my greatest pillar of support is gone. At most, I can get some help from the church and use some sealed artifacts. In the past, I wasn't too worried about the effects the Red Angel Evil Spirit's return has on me. Now, I have to raise my guard for this matter. Patrick Bryan knows very well that Dwayne Dantes is equivalent to Gehrman Sparrow, who is equivalent to the Blessed of Death. I had intentionally revealed this information, hoping that it would direct the points of suspicion to Mr. Azek, the Death Consul. And now, this also means that the Red Angel Evil Spirit would be able to grasp this information in no time. The Red Angel Evil Spirit currently only has a high level, but his actual standard shouldn't have recovered to the level of an angel. There's no irreconcilable feud between him and me, nor do I have what he wants. Even if he knows that Dantes is equivalent to Gehrman Sparrow, it would be very unlikely for him to deal with me directly. Other than attacking me directly, what harm will it bring after he grasps this situation? Is he using this to set up a conspiracy or sell the intelligence to someone who needs it? What conspiracy? Who would want it? Many thoughts and names surfaced in his mind, but they were quickly eliminated by him. This included Amon's brother and the Angel of Fate Ouroboros. From the Red Angel evil spirit's past actions, for the time being, he wouldn't make contact with Rose Redemption, and Amon's brother is a sworn enemy of Medici and Company. Suddenly, a name appeared in his mind, Zeradol. The leader of the secret order, the Sequence 1 Seer Pathway Angel, Zeradol, who had returned to normalcy after becoming mad. According to Rhodes's feedback, this powerful and concealed existence had already left his original location, and his whereabouts were unknown. Previously, Klein had been wondering if he would come to Backlund due to the law of Beyonder characteristic convergence. Medici and the Zeradol and Zoroast families were serving under the Solomon Empire. Even if they weren't friendly with each other, they must be very familiar with each other. In the foggy town, Zeradol had met Gehrman Sparrow. If he really wants to pursue something, he would definitely chase after the crazy adventurer. With a thought in his mind, Klein instinctively began to assume that Zeradol was in Backlund in search of Gehrman Sparrow, and with that, he began to analyze the situation for other abnormalities. At almost the same instant that he thought of something, Klein recalled the failure of the joint operation between Sharon and the Sanguine. The Rose School of Thought is also looking for Gehrman Sparrow, so would Zeradol, who received the corresponding news, work with them? Back then, the operation was on the brink of success. The Rose School of Thought's person in charge in Backlund had left in a hurry. Clearly, he had only noticed the problem at the last moment. With the Sanguine preparing the corresponding sealed artifact, it's rather impossible for such a failure to happen. Even the Sanguine Duke was puzzled and confused, but what if it was thanks to the perceptive intuition of a Sequence 1 Angel of the Seer Pathway? This would explain it perfectly. Back then, Zeradol was sitting opposite the Rose School of Thought's Backlund person in charge. The Rose School of Thought retreated in a panic and had even deliberately left behind a doll to create moonlight and cleanse everything so as to cover up the existence of Zeradol. Also, the fact that Gehrman Sparrow has a certain relationship with the Death Consul isn't a secret. Will Zeradol spread out all his marionettes and sense if there's the power of death in Backlund? Previously, when Patrick Bryan was holding rituals, there was actually Zeradol's marionette watching him. If the Red Angel evil spirit has already sold the intelligence to Zeradol, then wouldn't my returning to Backlund Street in such a chaotic situation be giving myself up? His pupils constricted, and he immediately said to the coachman in front, "Just stop here. I suddenly thought of something else I need to settle." After he said that, he felt extremely tense, afraid that the coachman wouldn't answer him and continue driving. Fortunately, none of this happened. The horse carriage stopped by the side of the road, and with his valet, Anuni, Klein walked towards a small alley nearby. Immediately following that, he snapped his fingers and allowed the scarlet flames to emerge from his pocket, covering both himself and his marionette. He had to rush to St. Samuel Cathedral as soon as possible in a concealed manner. With a flash of flames, their two figures disappeared. However, after completing a leap, the flames within his senses suddenly disappeared, all of them. A spacious living room appeared in front of him. On an ordinary reclining chair was a tall and thin man. He was young and had southern continent blood in him. He looked rather handsome and appeared a little anemic. The Red Angel evil spirit, Sauron Einham Medici. This Red Angel played with a ball of scarlet red flames in his hand as the corners of his mouth curled up. "You actually sensed it earlier than I expected." "Heh, using flaming jump in front of me." Chapter 1086. A simple inference. The moment he saw the Red Angel evil spirit, Klein's pupils dilated. The human-skinned glove on his left hand suddenly turned transparent. He didn't listen to what the other party had to say. His instinctive reaction was to immediately teleport away, but at this moment, the spirit world that entered his eyes was different from usual. Countless transparent creatures in indescribable forms were all dyed in a color that was a mixture of iron and blood. The surrounding area was filled with thick smoke, and there were 7 rays of light that contained infinite knowledge hidden above them. It was almost impossible to see them. Klein's heart skipped a beat. He didn't rashly teleport. Upon seeing this, the Red Angel evil spirit chuckled. What are you afraid of, Zeradol? Upon hearing this, Klein subconsciously looked around, but he didn't discover anything unusual. The Red Angel evil spirit maintained that annoying smile and pointed to the sofa opposite the reclining chair. If I had already informed him that Dwayne Dantes is Gairman Sparrow, and that you will return to 160, Buckland Street in the morning, then the person waiting in the wine cellar wouldn't be a living person. Instead, it would be your hung-up butler and servants, looking as though they were ham left to dry age. Of course, they would similarly welcome you warmly. Sit. Under such circumstances, listening to my thoughts and intentions first isn't a bad thing. He imagined the scene described by the Red Angel evil spirit. Although Klein had done similar things himself, his hair stood on end, and he was horrified. He kept his guard up, allowing the marionette, Konas Kilgore, in the form of Dwayne Dantes to sit on the sofa while he waited by the side as though he was his personal servant, Enuni. He had unknowingly swapped places with his marionette and instantly changed their appearances. Perhaps it's because you just learned of this information from Patrick Bryan, and you haven't even informed Zeradol yet? Klein retorted through his marionette. At the same time, he determined from the words of the Red Angel evil spirit that Zeradol had really come to Backland. This was a complete and unrestricted, terrifying, and bizarre sequence. One angel. It was enough to be called a hidden existence. The Red Angel evil spirit's gaze swept across the valet and his master before smiling. I'll be able to get something I want to know in 15 minutes from a fool like Patrick Bryan. Furthermore, an entire night and a morning has passed since the ritual. You and Miss Messenger might have something in common. Klein made the marionette raise his eyebrows. And so? The Red Angel evil spirit gently rocked the reclining chair it was in. I'm not sure if you've heard of such a saying. When you choose a beyonder pathway, your corresponding friends and enemies will be determined. As for us, we aren't friends, but we aren't enemies either. Of course, you did have some conflicts with me, but no one suffered any great losses. The matter has passed. To me, your growth will bring great trouble to a few people I hate, so I don't want to kill you in advance. I'm happy to see you continue your advancement. The Emperor had said similar words. A few people he hates. Klein deliberated and asked, Blasphemer Amon. Not that ignorant and not that stupid either. The Red Angel evil spirit laughed and stroked his chin. Be it his words or actions, he gave people the urge to hit him. After some thought, Klein calmly pointed out a question, then you can definitely choose Zeradol. If he can rise up because of this, he will similarly bring about extreme trouble for Blasphemer Amon. Compared to him, I'm still too weak. I'll still need a long time to grow. There are too many possible accidents from this point forth. The Red Angel evil spirit nodded seriously. Indeed, that's what I thought in the beginning as well. A fellow like you, who isn't much stronger than a wild dog, what are you going to use to compete with the already sequence 1 Zeradol? Die faster than anyone else? At this point, the Red Angel evil spirit changed the topic and sighed. However, if one can choose the most ideal proposal in this world, that would be too wonderful. Before he could finish his sentence, a bloody gash appeared on his left bloody cheek. The wound opened up in a wide manner, opening and closing like a mouth, and revealed 2 rows of illusory white teeth. I've investigated. The collapse of the Sauron family was caused by Zeradol and Roselle. Is this the spirit left behind by the ancestor of the Sauron family? The dissociation of the Red Angel is worse than I imagined. No, this isn't considered a normal split personality, but 3 people being stuffed into one body. No matter what they do, they have to first come to a unanimous decision, or there will be internal strife. Klein believed that the Red Angel evil spirit wasn't setting up a trap, but that he had no way of informing Zeradol of the relevant information. This is his weakness. I can use it in the future. Klein muttered silently before asking, then why did you come to me? Just to say those words. The Red Angel evil spirit raised its hand to rub his left cheek, causing the mouth that appeared to slowly disappear. At the same time, he smiled and said, "Aren't you investigating the lone royal family? It seems to involve a high-ranking demoness named Katarina. If you have any tracks from her, inform me before you carry out any operation." Saintess of White Katarina. Why is the Red Angel evil spirit looking for her? The Hunter Pathways Sequence 4 can cause women to become men. The Sequence 7 of the Demoness Pathway can make men into women. This should be two separate Beyonder pathways that can be interchanged. The Red Angel evil spirit can't find a suitable Hunter Pathway Beyonder characteristic, so it plans to jump to the Demoness Pathway. That's right. As an evil spirit, as long as he resolves his issue of survival, he can still advance using potions and characteristics. Klein was first taken aback before he used the secrets he knew of to come up with a guess. He suddenly had a strange idea: when there are both high-sequence Beyonder characteristics of the Hunter and Demoness pathways within a body, would the Red Angel evil spirit display a male form or a female form? Whoever has a higher level and is in charge decides. At that moment, the Red Angel evil spirit looked at Dwayne Dantes and his valet and scoffed. "You have a great talent for provoking others." "I haven't said anything," Klein inwardly replied in a daze. The Red Angel evil spirit curled his lips and said, "I can guess what you're thinking, unless you admit that you're ignorant. However, this might be a good thing for them." "Shut up." A bloody mouth appeared on both sides of the Red Angel evil spirit's cheeks. Looking at the dissociative identity disorder happening before him, Klein rationally gave up on the idea of going deeper into the topic and said, "It's not impossible to inform you in advance, but the problem is, how should I inform you?" From his point of view, the Demoness of Unaging, Katarina, was a vile person. It was the same with the Red Angel evil spirit. It wasn't a bad thing to have them clash. The Red Angel evil spirit smiled and said, "Of course it's by reciting my honorific name, the great god of war, the symbol of iron and blood, the ruler of chaos and strife." Pooey. The mouth on both sides of the Red Angel evil spirit's cheeks let out a disdainful sound, as though they didn't approve of it. This is a standard deity's honorific name. After gaining control of the uniqueness, to a certain extent, Medici had already become a quasi-god. And as long as no one can accommodate the uniqueness of the Red Priest pathway, this evil spirit's level will not drop. The honorific name will always point towards him. Klein nodded thoughtfully and probed, "What do you know about the secret ruins of Blood Emperor Lista Tudor?" Upon hearing this name, the Red Angel's facial muscles twitched slightly before sneering. "Are you asking what the secret of the lone royal family is? You might not know this, but you might be familiar with the Blood Emperor's secret ruins," Klein said deliberately. The Red Angel evil spirit suddenly laughed out loud and slapped the armrest of the reclining chair. "Your tricks are so childish that they look like a 3-year-old's. The secret hidden by the lone royal family is very simple. I could guess it just by reading the newspapers. TSK, you only have a smart-looking face. Your brain is filled with squirming worms. You can guess it just by reading the newspapers." Klein frowned and asked. The Red Angel evil spirit finished laughing and curled his lips. "Of course, it needs some basic knowledge. I believe you should have it. How about this? I'll ask you a few questions, and you'll understand how simple the answer is. Is that Blood Emperor secret ruins the kind known by the churches?" "No." Klein shook his head firmly. The Red Angel evil spirit smiled and continued asking, "Do you know which sequence the Blood Emperor, Lista Tudor, was in before he advanced to sequence 0? "The Black Emperor pathway, sequence 1 Prince of Abolition," Klein calmly replied. The Red Angel evil spirit nodded slightly. "Did you know that before Lista Trunsoist became Blood Emperor, he was one of the 2 consuls of the Tudor Trunsoist United Empire, and that the ones supporting him were 6 of the 7 present deities, including Evernight and Storm?" Klein nodded and gave an affirmative answer. The half-slumped red angel evil spirit crossed one leg over the other. Then do you know that, after Alista became Blood Emperor, he had truly gone mad and even died during the Battle of the Gods? Kind of. Klein didn't dare to be too sure, because this was something he had read from Roselle's diary, and the Emperor had learned it from Mr. Dorr. The red angel evil spirit chuckled and said, "Then do you think that Alista Tudor would have the rationality and opportunity to leave behind secret ruins after he became Blood Emperor?" No. Klein slowly shook his head. The red angel evil spirit spread its hands and said, "Since it's a ruin left behind by Alista before he became Blood Emperor, and if the 6 deities who supported him aren't aware of it, what could it be? If you had a choice, would you take a path destined to go mad?" This. Klein instantly thought of the 9 mausoleums that the Black Emperor needed in the ritual needed to become a god. To a prince of abolition, before the return of the former Black Emperor, secretly seeking out a way to advance to Black Emperor was something he wanted to do. "Is that ruin related to the Black Emperor?" Klein asked in a deep voice. The red angel evil spirit rubbed his chin and chuckled. "You seem to know the Black Emperor's ritual. Isn't that simple? What has the King of Lone been doing in the past 2 to 3 years? The Grain Act was abolished, there's the Civil Servant Unified Examination, a restructuring of the military, the House of Lords and Nobles are struck down a notch, strengthening the authority of the House of Commons. Isn't this something that was published in the newspapers? Besides, isn't it common knowledge that the Justiciar pathway can be switched to the Black Emperor pathway? As many of these things were the trends of the times to Klein, with one of them being pushed by him, he had never considered them from a mysticism perspective in the past. Now that they were connected, he immediately understood. Soon, he recalled something else, the last person who wanted to become Black Emperor was Roselle. He happened to be related to Amon's brother. Chapter 1087 The Deities' Attitudes The Grain Act was abolished. The Civil Servant Unified Examination. A concession was made, bringing the Church's forces into the military. These seem to be in line with the trends of the times, but in essence, they're oppressive, weakening the nobles, and supporting a new class. Compared to the previous 1,000-year rule, this can really be considered to be against the norm. It's the order needed to become Black Emperor. In the past decade or so, the changes in architecture style have been very drastic as well. For Roselle to be able to obtain the uniqueness and obtain the corresponding sequence one beyond her characteristic, that ancient secret organization must have put in quite a bit of effort. It might have even provided part of it directly. When this emperor perished, who took away those characteristics? Also, Bernadette has been in Backland for the past few months and has been coming here frequently. Sigh. The main issue is that the asymmetrical aesthetics of the empires in the Fourth Epoch had affected my understanding, making me believe that rules that violate normal circumstances are odd and against the order that humans would strive for. Now that I think about it again, what does it mean by normal circumstances? Isn't it just something that everyone has already gotten used to and therefore, won't have an instinctive sense of resistance towards it? From the tribes to the countries, from feudalism to republicanism, don't they all violate the normal circumstances of the period they were in, with countless people wishing to return to the past? The phrase, old fogies and leftovers from the old dynasties, encompasses this problem. From the looks of it, as long as a deity doesn't intervene, the revolution that the Black Emperor needs will definitely happen. It's just a matter of time. With the tides of the times surging over, it's really hard to stop it. That brother of Amon is indeed a powerful and terrifying author. In the depths of the Blood Emperor's ruins, there should be a mausoleum similar to a pyramid. And according to the ritual requirements, one has to drive one's citizens to build it. Therefore, there are cases of people going missing in the East Borough and overseas slave trade, when the war develops to a certain stage, using the excuse of praying for victory, or the nation's mourning for soldiers, a huge gathering with a large number of citizens can be convened to participate in the sacrificial ritual in the various cities in the royal capital, yes. Many years ago, the lone royal family obtained the crown of the Balam Empire, and they connected the king's name to the title of emperor. What a great plan! When he was alerted by the Red Angel evil spirit's questions, Klein's mind tensed up. Many thoughts flashed through his mind, and at the same time, he had another question. He looked at the tall, thin, young gatekeeper who didn't look rosy. He said after some deliberation, George III wishes to directly become Black Emperor. But he isn't even at sequence 4, even if George III could act ahead of time to make himself more talented and reduce the impact caused by the mental imprint in the potion, Klein didn't believe that a sequence 5 Beyonder could become a god directly. Unless he was lucky enough with that very slim chance of success. And such luck wasn't something that could be described simply as being sufficient. The snake of Mercury who represents fate, Will Auseptin, didn't even dare to directly devour the die of probability, and he had to seriously find a way to accommodate it. The Red Angel evil spirit scoffed when he heard that. How do you know that George III is only sequence 5? How are you so sure that the George III under investigation is the real George III? Could it be that he was imagined into existence, or could it be a faceless at the angel level? These are truly very difficult things to accomplish, but to a certain zealot, these are all within the scope of one's ability and the resources in one's grasp. I suspect that George III is an official member of the secret organization that was created to mimic our Rose redemption. His true level might already be at the angel level. Heh, I wouldn't be surprised if he is already at sequence 1. This, Emperor Roselle once said that the members of that ancient secret organization are all important figures that he couldn't imagine. When they combine forces, other than dealing with the 7 churches, there's nothing that can't be done. This actually includes the king of a country. That's right, later on, the emperor also became the ruler of Intis. Zealot. Is this what the Red Angel evil spirit thinks of Amon's brother? Although this is clearly a little extreme, with a strong bias, there's a certain reason for it. A nickname isn't given randomly. Klein made his marionette frown slightly. You seem to be able to see through the truth of this matter easily, but why hasn't the Church of Evernight, Storm, and Steam realized this problem? Their understanding of the Black Emperor is no less than yours. After all, the 2 churches of the Evernight and the Storm had supported the Tudor Trunsoist United Empire. The Red Angel evil spirit wore an amused expression again as he sized up Dwayne Dantes and his valet. How old are you? Why are you still so naive and childish? The 6 deities and the 6 churches are not necessarily equivalent at times. The things the 6 deities know might not be told to the angels and saints beneath them. The Red Angel evil spirit let out a chortle again when he saw that Dwayne Dantes was still frowning in confusion. Trust me, what I said, and what I'll be saying next, is undoubtedly a form of provocation to ruin the image of the 6 deities, but you can consider whether it's the truth. Let's put it this way. In regards to someone wanting to become the Black Emperor, the attitude of the 6 deities, the 7 deities is rather ambiguous. They often have conflicts of their own. More precisely, they are happy to see a mentally sound Black Emperor be born, but they also wish that it's one they support. Therefore, they will not give any detailed revelations to the various churches. They will only follow the normal procedure and deliver punishment if there are results to the investigation. Otherwise, they will tacitly approve of its development. Of course, during this process, we cannot eliminate the possibility that a certain existence might want to do some damage, but it will not be so direct and obvious, because it will definitely be stopped by the other deities. If it wasn't because he knew of them taking such attitudes, how could George III dare take the risk? Alright, now that the war has broken out, he has overcome the crisis. He can wait for the next opportunity. At that moment, Klein thought of the news that had been leaked out during the operation launched at the Blood Emperor ruins. He was momentarily unsure if he should suspect that the upper echelons of the 3 churches had a member of the ancient secret organization, or that a certain deity had personally reminded Amon's brother. And if it were the latter, the suspect was undoubtedly not the Lord of Storms. After a moment of silence, Klein hesitantly asked, "So, as long as nothing goes wrong, George III will carry out the ritual to become a god, despite everything that he has done? And if everything goes smoothly and he survives the backlash from the potion, will he ascend to the throne of Black Emperor?" The Red Angel Evil Spirit replied in a relaxed tone, "Is there a problem?" "Why would the 7 deities?" Klein couldn't help but ask. The Red Angel Evil Spirit sked and said, "Do you want to know?" "If you want to know, I can tell you now." Just as he was about to say, "Of course," Klein suddenly recalled the warning that Ma'am Ariana had given him. "There are some things that make it easier to be infected the more you know. Both your body and soul will be infected. Once you become an angel, you can seek out the exact answer." As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Klein made his marionette smile. "Forget it then. Very good. You nearly died out of curiosity and foolishness." The Red Angel Evil Spirit shook his head regretfully. He then looked out the window and said, "If there's nothing else, you may leave." "All right." Klein made the marionette stand up and raise his right hand. At this moment, the half-slumped Red Angel Evil Spirit suddenly asked, "I have this nagging feeling that if I had attacked you just now, you wouldn't be completely helpless, am I right?" "Of course, why do you think I chose flaming jump instead of teleporting?" "That was to hide the burning of the paper crane in my wallet. This way, Snake of Fate Will Oseptin's gaze would silently land on me. If anything happens, he would use the yesterday once more charm. To deal with an existence at your level, one can't be too careful." "How could one not be careful and keep a trump card hidden?" Klein didn't directly answer the Red Angel Evil Spirit's question. He smiled and expressed his tacit agreement. "Ha!" He snapped his fingers, causing scarlet flames to surge out of his pocket and envelop him. As the scarlet streams dispersed, Klein's figure disappeared in front of the Red Angel Evil Spirit. Backlund, at Dr. Aaron Sirius's home, in a black pram. The chubby baby rubbed his eyes and muttered silently, "Backlund really isn't suitable for children to live in, 39 Backlund Street." Having done a divination, Klein saw Member of Parliament Mocked who was about to head to Westborough. "Didn't you go to Mager Manor?" "I'm planning on letting Rihanna and Hazel hide in Moose Manor." Mocked pinched the sockets of his eyes. "I wonder when this side effect will disappear." Klein retracted his gaze from this action and sighed. "I have to prepare some weapons for the manor, so I came to seek your help. Also, if you have the means to get food, you can help me buy some." In his opinion, the low-level citizens weren't able to stock up on food because they didn't have any money at all. At most, they would stock up a few days' worths of food. Therefore, his purchase wouldn't affect them for the time being. Once the food situation worsened, he could donate more of it through Miss Audrey. Before food rationing was implemented, if Klein didn't stockpile, other rich people would do so. Furthermore, they might not donate it. "No problem," Mocked agreed without any hesitation. Klein didn't ask about the price, because he had given housekeeper Tanaja a total of £5,000 for such matters. Of course, after confirming that Zeradol was in Backlund and that Dwayne Dante's being equivalent to Gehrman Sparrow was known to the Red Angel Evil Spirit, he decided not to return to Mager Manor. He planned on changing his identity so as not to affect the innocent. As for the excuse, it had been arranged by the Church of Evernight that he would perform certain tasks and that he was unable to return for a long period of time. If there was a charity event that required his help, he gave Miss Audrey the authority to stand in his place. Chapter 1088 Hiding in Seeker. On the way to St. Samuel Cathedral from Backlund Street, Klein passed by the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation at 22 Phelps Street. He was surprised to find that the door was still open. As the initiator and current director, he placed quite a bit of concern over this matter. He temporarily slowed down and walked over. Just as he entered the door, he saw Miss Audrey walking down from the second floor with her personal maidservant, a big golden retriever, and a few staff members beside her. "Good afternoon." In this situation, there doesn't seem to be a need to insist on doing anything. Klein went forward and voiced out his doubts. Audrey held the newspaper in her hand as she looked at Dwayne Dantes. Some of our beneficiaries were injured in the air raid. I just went to visit them and arranged for follow-up treatment. The noble lady's eyes were slightly red, as though she had seen all sorts of heart-wrenching scenes in the hospital. May the goddess bless them. Klein came to a realization and drew a crimson moon on his chest. He took the opportunity to say the idea that he had come up with long ago. I plan to donate some more money to buy food, medicine, and medical equipment for the foundation. In this man-made disaster, we can do more things. A brilliant idea. Those who are suffering will be grateful to you from the bottom of their hearts, Mr. Dantes. Audrey tapped her chest 4 times in a fluid motion. There was obvious joy and pity in her eyes. I will do my best as well. She didn't want to just donate money, but to spearhead certain matters. Klein nodded. You don't have to praise me. At times like these, I only did what I should do. Apart from donating funds, I will also donate food. All of you can discuss this directly with my butler, Walter. Yes, Miss Audrey, I can write a letter of authorization to you now so that you can use my name to transfer the resources of Mager Manor. What about you, Mr. Dantes? Audrey asked with a vague guess. This was the most normal response in such a conversation. I received a notice from the church that I need to help them perform certain tasks. As for what they are, I haven't gone to St. Samuel Cathedral yet, so I'm not sure either. The only thing I can confirm is that I have to travel around. I won't be able to return to Mager Manor for a long time. Klein gave the reason he had come up with previously. Miss Audrey, during this period of time at the Foundation, I have come to understand your character and ability. Your background and standing also determine your visions and style. Handing these matters to you is the best solution I can come up with. Klein didn't expect his lies to fool a senior spectator. He only wanted to deceive the people around justice. Oh, these people didn't include the dog. Does Mr. World want to temporarily give up on his identity as Dwayne Dantes so that he can perform certain matters in secret? Feeling enlightened, Audrey pretended to think. After a few seconds of silence, she said, with the current situation, I can't refuse such a request. Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He immediately got his personal servant, Anuni, to go upstairs to get a piece of paper and a pen. Then, while being witnessed by the staff, he personally drafted a letter of authorization, signed his name, printed his thumbprint, and stamped the seal. After doing all of this, Klein cast his gaze at the newspaper in Audrey's hand. Is there anything else? I just came back from outside the city. I only heard the paperboy shout that the kingdom has declared war on Fasak. Audrey pursed her lips and said with a slightly gloomy expression, not long after the airship fleet from Fasak attacked Backland, their Sonia Sea fleet took advantage of the thick fog to attack the Imperial Navy's base at Pritz Harbor's Oak Island and the shipyards in the surrounding area. Fortunately, the Church of the Lord of Storms received a warning beforehand and sent a telegram in advance. Pritz Harbor wasn't lost, but it lost quite a number of ships and factories. It said that many people died and were seriously injured. This is war, Klein sighed. Can I see how the king declared war? Audrey knew that there was something wrong with King George III, so she could tell that Mr. World was hiding his contempt. She didn't refuse and handed the newspaper over. It was the Tussock Times. Without needing to spread it open, he directly saw the king's declaration on the headlines. 708 years ago, the Phasacians took away Sonia Island from us. A year ago, the Phasacians stole half of our interests in East Balam. Today, they bombarded Backland and attacked Pritz Harbor. Many Loanese were killed and injured, and their blood has stained the ground. There's no way for us to back down any further. We can only be bullied again and again by the Phasacians if we back off. If we continue retreating, we will lose all our interests overseas. Large amounts of our products will not be sold. Countless workers will lose their jobs, and even more peasants will go bankrupt. Everything from the past and now states that justice is in our hands, and we have enough strength to seize complete victory. Everyone, I, your Emperor, George III, represent the Parliament and the Kingdom's government to declare war on Fasak. Unless they raise the white flag and surrender, we will never stop advancing. Advance, we shall take back Sonia Island. Advance, we shall conquer St. Milam. Victory will definitely belong to us. The gods will be with us. Klein quickly browsed through it and used his clown ability to stop his lips from curling up. He then returned the tussock Times to Audrey. He took off his hat and bowed. I'll leave the rest to you. I will, please rest assured. Audrey held the letter of authorization and newspapers and bowed. Without any further delay, Klein left the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation with his valet, Anuni, and arrived at St. Samuel Cathedral. At that moment, the church no longer had many believers present. Most of them had returned to their homes, busy preparing for their life with war having been declared. In the dark and quiet environment, Klein found a seat and sat down. He took off his hat, clasped his hands, and placed them in front of his mouth and nose. He softly recited the honorific name of the Evernight goddess, then said, I received news from the Red Angel Evil Spirit that it's very likely that Zeradal has already arrived in Backland. As for the secret ruins of the Blood Emperor, there's a high chance that it's the mausoleum needed for the Black Emperor ritual. After the prayer, Klein waited patiently for a while. He saw the Archbishop, Anthony Stevenson, enter from the side door and walk towards him. This saint was clean-shaven. He wore a black robe that had the Crimson Moon's emblem on it. He walked without making a sound, as though he was the night that slowly descended. Anthony didn't say a word after he approached Dwayne Dantes. He only signaled with his eyes before turning towards the library. With that, Klein got up, put on his hat, and followed silently behind. As for his personal servant, Anuni, he held his cane and walked to the entrance of the cathedral to wait. Outside the library, Archbishop Anthony turned around and revealed a smile. He said to Dwayne Dantes, war has erupted. There are too many things that need to be done. As a devout believer of the goddess, are you willing to provide some help? Indeed. From the looks of it, Ma'am Ariana has left Backland. As Klein sighed, he drew the Crimson Moon on his chest. It's my honor. Praise the lady. After responding, he immediately asked, what do you need me to do? I'll inform you when needed. Try not to go home during this period of time, St. Anthony said in an illogical tone. And in an instant, he understood what the other party meant. He had to hide for now. They had no time to deal with Zeradal. At most, they could provide him protection within a certain range. Just as I thought, the goddess is digesting the uniqueness of the death pathway. She will not be able to do a divine descent for a long period of time. The upper echelons of the church have to deal with the war, while the negative effects of Grade 0 sealed artifacts are more terrifying than the last. Klein nodded gently. Yes, Your Grace. May the goddess bless you. Saint Anthony drew the Crimson Moon. Praise the lady. The only escape is tranquility. Klein responded with a familiar gesture. Then, he left St. Samuel Cathedral and headed to another street with his valet. After walking for a while, both of them disappeared at some point in time. East Borough, in a two-bedroom rental apartment. Wearing an ordinary face, Klein took out the adventurer's harmonica and blew at it. Soon, Rionette Tinker walked out of the void with 4 blonde, red-eyed heads in hand. She wasn't surprised by her contractor's appearance. Without giving a letter, he directly said, "Tell Miss Sharon and Marie that Zeradal has come to Backland and is very likely to be in contact with the Rose School of Thought. They must be careful. It's best not to go to the Bravehearts bar in the near future." Zeradal, this time, Rionette Tinker's 4 heads spoke at the same time, as though they had spent a great deal of effort to recall who it was. Leader of the Secret Order, a Sequence 1 angel who once lost his mind before becoming normal again. Klein took out a gold coin and handed it to Miss Messenger. He didn't mention that Zeradol was very interested in Gehrman Sparrow. He believed that, as a high-level spirit world creature, Miss Messenger would be able to sense his uniqueness to a certain extent. Otherwise, there was no need for this angel to lower her status to be his messenger. If it was for yesterday once more charms, she could provide him help in a more decent manner. As for why Zeradol didn't discover the grey fog's aura in the foggy town but now shows interest in Gehrman Sparrow, Klein believed that there were 3 reasons. The first reason was that the grey fog's beyonder convergence had compelled this powerful seer to come to Backland, and he predicted something. The second reason was that Gehrman Sparrow was able to leave the foggy town despite receiving the wrong symbol and return to the real world. The third reason was that Gehrman Sparrow was likely related to the organization that believed in the Fool. By the time Zeradol came into contact with the Rose School of Thought and realized that the Mother Tree of Desire was somewhat interested in Gehrman Sparrow, even if he didn't have a guess, the importance he placed on Gehrman Sparrow would still rise exponentially. Rionette Tinker didn't say anything else. One of the heads tilted forward and bit the gold coin. After watching Miss Messenger leave, he pulled a chair and sat down. He sized up the sky outside the window across a wooden desk. The layout of the rental apartment was the same as the one he used to live in Tingen City. There was a bedroom inside, and outside of it was a living room, dining room, and study room. There was also a bunk bed. At that moment, in the room, other than him, there were only his marionettes, Konas and Inuni. Chapter 1089. A difficult decision. After sitting for a while, Klein raised his hand to rub his temples. He then stood up, took 4 steps counterclockwise, and went above the grey fog. He then conjured Gehrman Sparrow. By praying to Mr. Fool, he sent messages to Danitz and the hermit Catlia. The message for the former was to remind him to be careful of the secret order. Although he didn't believe that Zeradol would directly seek out Danitz, a person who had crossed paths with Gehrman Sparrow on the surface, there was nothing wrong with reminding him regardless. As a bizarro sorcerer, Klein had a certain level of understanding of the beyonders of the seer pathway. He believed that those who could truly advance to such a state were sufficiently cautious and careful. This didn't exclude certain oddities and exceptions, but it definitely didn't exclude Zeradol, who was at sequence 1. And in this situation, in the eyes of an angel who was in control of enough secrets, Danitz was more like bait that was deliberately thrown out to fish for certain targets. Therefore, it was highly likely that Zeradol would very carefully and cautiously avoid him. At most, he would send members of the secret order to do some direct or indirect investigations. By the same logic, the message that Klein gave the hermit Catlia had the same content. However, this wasn't the main point. The main point was for her to immediately contact Queen Mystic Bernadette, saying that Gehrman Sparrow wanted to meet her as soon as possible. In addition, he also informed the Admiral of Stars, something he wanted to delay till the next tarot gathering, that she was to decide if she wanted to purchase the Sequence 5 Druid and Sequence 4 Classical Metallurgist of the Planter Pathway. West of the Berserk Sea, Theros Island. Danitz, who was gathering clues about Vice Admiral Ailment, held a cup filled with golden beer when his expression suddenly became extremely complicated. "What's wrong? You saw someone and recalled an indescribable encounter." Anderson shook the Lanty-proof distilled liquor in his hand as he teased the abnormal Danitz. Danitz gulped down a mouthful of beer and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand before saying with a somewhat depressed expression, "We have to be careful of secret order members from now on." Ever since he met Gehrman Sparrow, such words were a common occurrence for him. His initial reaction had gone from the point of panic to numbness and depression. He suspected that one day, he would be listed as being wanted by all organizations of different sizes, except Mr. Fool's organization. Anderson sized up Danitz when he heard that as he chuckled. "Sometimes, I feel that Gehrman Sparrow is more like a hunter than me." "Heh, so the two of you have a special method of communication. You don't even need to summon a messenger." Danitz was just about to say a few perfunctory words when a person from Intis rushed into the tavern. He held a telegram and shouted, Fasak launched an air raid on Backlund. Lone has officially declared war. Declared war. Anderson and Danitz looked at each other. By relying on their pathway's characteristics, they acutely caught the scent of a large-scale war. Fasak attacked Backlund and Pritz Harbor, and in return, Lone has officially declared war. The 3 ironclad warship fleets weren't at the harbor, so there wasn't many losses. They're heading back to the Lone coast. Catlia's crew happened to pass through Oravi Island, and they had gathered all sorts of information from the telegrams. Just as she was thinking about how the pirate crew would react in this situation, she suddenly saw an endless grey fog and heard the word German Sparrow. Be careful of the Secret Order members. Be careful of Zeradal. As someone from Intis to a certain extent, what caught Catlia's attention was something that with the least importance. And it was precisely because of this that she had no doubts about the World German Sparrow's request to meet the Queen as soon as possible. She believed that this was related to the Secret Order and Zeradal. Finally, she said the 2 potion names softly, Druid. Classical Metallurgist. This sequence 4's modern name should be the Ancient Metallurgist. It was previously called Human Metallurgist. Catlia subconsciously walked to the window and cast her gaze down. On these seas which had a time difference between it and Backlund, Frank Lee and Artisan Sealf were leaning on the side of the ship, sunbathing. The former carried a relaxed expression and looked very pleased, but there was a pensive look in his eyes. It was as though there were still some problems that couldn't be resolved. The latter's face was pale, and his lips were quivering. Scattered over his clothes were mushrooms. Druid. Ancient Metallurgist. Admiral of Stars. Catlia repeated the 2 terms again, feeling as though something was pressing down on her. After about 10 seconds, Catlia adjusted the heavy glasses on her nose bridge and consoled herself. Mr. Fool didn't give any warnings. It means it's not a big deal. With this thought in mind, specks of bright light floated down, forming a staircase of light between the captain's cabin window and the deck. Catlia went down the stairs and walked to Frank Lee and Sealf's side. After a few seconds of silence, Catlia asked, Frank, what are your dreams? Only then did Frank Lee realize that his captain had arrived. With a push of his palm, he flipped to his feet. Dreams? This biologist thought about it seriously and said, I wish to be able to study the soil, the creation of objects, and cross-breeding techniques without restrictions, so as to ensure that humans will no longer be hungry anymore. Equality between people will be achieved. What you can do, I can do. What you can grow, I can also grow. Upon hearing this, Artisan Sealf slowly got up and silently crouched to the side, opening his mouth and vomiting. Frank Lee continued without being affected, in order to have such a world, one has to have sufficient food and resources, so I hope to create all kinds of creatures that can deal with different environments and conditions. Heh, everyone has their own tendencies. I prefer fish, beef, and spores. Catlia finished listening to Frank's description with a deadpan expression. However, during this process, she repeatedly nudged the thick glasses on her nose thrice. After a moment of silence, Catlia asked, There's only one step left to your research now. That's right. I'm just short of Admid's ability for catalyzing it. If I can _T get the formula, I_M help me make the Druid Beyonder characteristic I have into a mystical item, Frank answered frankly. No, I won't help you. You devil, the silently vomiting Artisan Sealf raised his head and shouted anxiously. Catlia watched this scene quietly. With a flip of her hand, she produced a gold coin. Ding! The gold coin flipped up before landing in Catlia's palm, heads facing up. I have the Druid Potion formula. It's from German Sparrow, 5,000 pounds, Catlia explained in detail, as though she was deliberately telling Artisan Sealf, informing him who the true murderer was. A look of pure joy immediately appeared in Frank Lee's eyes. He really is a swell guy. Captain, I've only saved up to 3,000 pounds. Can you lend me 2,000 pounds? Most of his previous savings had been used to buy the Druid Beyonder characteristic, and he had even sold some of his items. Katlia fell silent once again. A few seconds later, she nodded while Frank Lee's expectant eyes were on her. Okay. Northborough, Backlund Medical University's affiliated hospital. Eudora lay on the bed with a blank expression, lacking the vibrancy a young girl should have. She had woken up from her coma some time ago, but she hadn't opened her eyes. Thus, she heard the doctor tell her parents that the injury she received to her right leg from the air raid likely couldn't be saved. They had to be prepared for an amputation procedure. After that, she lay down in a daze, feeling as though there were many people coming and going one after another. Among them, the person who had originally only visited the student next door, the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation director, Audrey, indicated that she was willing to pay for the subsequent treatments after hearing about her. The school's chancellor, Mr. Portland Moment, had promised to create the most advanced and most convenient robotic limb for her to walk like a normal person. However, none of this dispelled the gloominess, heaviness, sorrow, and despair in Eudora's heart. She wasn't even 18, and she had yet to enjoy the beauty of life, but now, she was about to lose a leg and lose her dreams. Her family wasn't considered wealthy. Her father was the owner of a grocery store that believed in the Lord of Storms. He was violent, barbaric, and unwilling to reason with women. Her mother was timid and weak, and she relied on her father to survive. If not for the fact that her family didn't have a second child at home, Eudora wouldn't have been able to study at all. But even so, her father had chosen a place like the Backlund Technical School where results could be quickly seen. Previously, she had commented on how lucky she was that the Backlund Technical School had been turned into the Backlund University of Technology. Furthermore, she had passed the examinations and become a real university student. This made her smile every day as she passed the joy to the people around her while having the time to indulge in her hobby for poetry. Eudora's dream was to remain in the university and be a university teacher, finding a husband who loved her as she loved him. At the same time, she could constantly keep true to her pursuit of poetry, hoping that they would one day be published in magazines and newspapers. Now, all of this had been destroyed by a bomb that fell from the sky. It had been mercilessly and cruelly destroyed. After an unknown period of time, Eudora silently pulled up the blanket and covered her face. She let out a soft whimper that sounded like a baby beast. The crying didn't stop for a while. After a while, Eudora suddenly lifted the blanket and saw a black figure standing by her bed. Half of the black figure's face was covered by mushrooms, while the other half was covered in weeds. In the black figure's hand was a wooden cane. Eudora couldn't even scream. She felt like her heart was about to burst out of her chest. The black figure touched her with the tip of the cane. Eudora felt her heart return to normal while her right leg felt cold, as though she could feel her leg again. When she looked at the bedside again, the black figure wasn't there anymore. In her daze, Eudora moved her right leg and realized that it wasn't painful at all. It was as if she had never been hurt before. She pulled up the blanket again and covered her face. A few seconds later, there was a sound of disbelief under the blanket. It was filled with fear, but it was also mixed with crying that were tears of joy. Chapter 1090 Haunted Tales Nighttime, Pritz Harbor, in a cemetery in the suburbs. The people who died in the airship bombings had been brought here. The priests and bishops of the three churches were busy comforting the souls of the dead to prevent any anomalies from happening. In that short day, many wives lost their husbands, many children lost their mothers, and many families were down to a single person. Some of them loitered in the cemetery, some silent, others sobbing. Some even wept until they fainted. Wearing an ordinary-looking face, Klein stood among them and watched everything without saying a word. It was as if he had recalled the funeral he had attended before. While it was dark, he had just used life's cane to treat the injured in Backlund and Pritz Harbor's various hospitals, victims of the air raid. He had also left behind a strange and horrifying urban myth to help him further digest the bizarro sorcerer potion. And he knew that, once such haunted tales spread like wildfire, Zeradal, who was in Backlund, would immediately be able to understand what was going on. He would send his marionettes to monitor the corresponding areas. Hence, before the news spread, he relied on teleporting to travel to all the hospitals in Backland and Pritz Harbor, leaving behind all sorts of horror stories to treat patients with severe illnesses. When this matter spread, he believed that he would receive a great deal of feedback, allowing him to take a firm and huge step in the direction of completely digesting the potion. However, Klein didn't stop there. The existence of a conspiracy created by the Red Angel evil spirit, and the fact that Zeradol was in Backland, was like a guillotine hanging above his head, urging him to continue searching for opportunities. Hence, he came here to witness the grief of the ordinary citizens. After a moment of silence, Klein retracted his gaze and turned to leave the cemetery. After arriving at an empty spot, his left glove quickly turned dark blue, and slippery fish scales grew out. With a whoosh, the wind swept over, and Klein flew up into the air towards the harbor. In the sea beyond the land, the Sonia Sea fleet from the Fasak Empire was quietly waiting. It was as if they were prepared to launch another bombardment after daybreak, destroying the rest of the shipyards. Soon, Klein arrived above the harbor ruins and looked at the faint flames in the dark night. At the same time, his two marionettes had used flaming jump to rush over from the ground, splitting up into different hidden locations. From what he had heard and seen, Klein didn't have any doubts or feelings towards what he was about to do. However, he was still confused. Taking revenge on the invaders was a legitimate matter, but if he were to seriously injure the Fasak fleet, the happiest person would be the lone king, George III, the true mastermind behind all of this, one of the culprits who had pushed for war. There are too many principles in this world, but only those who have truly experienced it will realize that there are times when doing nothing is the correct path. It will fill one's heart with conflict. With a sigh, Klein turned his attention to the information he had received from the Hanged Man. The commander of the Sonia Sea fleet from the Fasak Empire was Admiral Igor Einhorn. He was a demigod from the royal family, currently a Sequence 4 Iron-Blooded Knight of the Red Priest pathway. Through this information, together with the contents of the Red Priest card, more key points surfaced in Klein's mind. Iron-Blooded Knight can make women turn into men, and also make them have courage that is comparable to steel. Not only can they control multiple types of flames, but they're also masters in this domain. They can even turn their own flames into steel, on the Nepos, the flagship of the Fasak Empire's Sonia Sea fleet. A burly man with a thick beard more than 2 meters tall, Igor Einhorn, was sitting behind a desk. As he drank Sonia blood wine, he pondered over what to do next. After daybreak, Lone's airship crew will definitely attack. Their Pritz ironclad warship and the corresponding fleet will return soon. If they continue staying here, I'll be left in a passive situation. Although I'm a iron-blooded knight, allowing the entire fleet's power to gather onto me while distributing the damage, the commanding officer of the ironclad warship is most likely a demigod of the Arbiter pathway, or they have the corresponding Grade 1 sealed artifact, so it won't be easy to deal with them. If I'm not careful, they might be able to make use of the advantage of their fleet speed and armaments. Retreating is the best option. After that, we'll continue attacking the coastal ports while the lone navy is damaged. Heh, this war is indeed a good opportunity to digest potions. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to become a war bishop before this. Otherwise, I might have a chance to advance to the level of an angel after the war. Sigh, only a war bishop can truly unleash the strength of an army. It's not like how I am right now, only able to focus power on myself. In the midst of Igor Einhorn's thoughts, he planned on using the hidden connection between an iron-blooded knight and the soldiers that were under his command to inform his adjutant to pay him a visit, so that he could give the orders of performing a retreat overnight. Suddenly, he looked up at the door. Thump. There was a knock on the door, and it instantly reverberated in the quiet room. An advance warning before an attack. This thought flashed across Igor's mind and he became extremely tense. In a battle between demigods, setting up an environment, sudden attacks, and catching enemies by surprise was a good way to seize the initiative. It was a combination that could effectively defeat or even kill an enemy of the same level. On the contrary, it was very difficult to accomplish it successfully. Therefore, giving an advance notice before an attack was either a warning without any follow-ups, or it meant that the attacker's level and strength far exceeded the target. As a senior iron-blooded knight, Igor instinctively considered the worst situation. He immediately woke up every sailor and soldier on the Nepos to establish a connection with him. At that moment, the noise sounded again. Boom! This time, the knocking sound on the door was comparable to the loud boom of a salvo. It made Igor feel like a bomb had exploded in his ears. Under his high-strung nerves, he carefully listened to the commotion. This wasn't much different from the roar of a cataclysmic enterror. In an instant, Igor's ears buzzed and he felt dizzy. He quickly spread out the damage and let every member of the Nepos hear a faint buzz. Then, Igor grabbed the fountain pen on the table and threw it at the door. This dark red fountain pen left afterimages along the way, like a cannonball that had been fired. To an iron-blooded knight, no matter how ordinary it was, it could become a terrifying murderous weapon through his augmentation. Boom! The door that was hit by the fountain pen cracked open, revealing the person in the corridor who had knocked on the door. It was a man in a black trench coat. His body was as thin as paper, and his face had no facial features. At that moment, the fountain pen had already exploded. The tiny fragments were like storms brought about by the sweeping of a machine gun. It embroiled the person who knocked on the door, tearing him into pieces of flesh and blood. Igor didn't relax. Instead, he stood up and looked around warily. He clearly knew that the person who had knocked on the door hadn't appeared. At this moment, the adjutant, whose bunk was diagonally across from him, opened the door and ran out. When he saw the flesh and blood on the ground, he said in surprise, "Admiral, what happened?" "There's an intruder." Before Igor could finish his sentence, his gaze suddenly froze on the adjutant. The adjutant retracted his gaze from the flesh and blood on the ground and slowly raised his head. There were no eyebrows, eyes, nose, or mouth on his face. It was the same as the person who had knocked just now, a featureless surface. Igor's heart palpitated, and his entire body ignited, transforming into flames that shot out in all directions. After the scarlet flames dispersed, they swept forward and surrounded the adjutant. The fire quickly spread, revealing the already charred adjutant. When the cold wind blew past, the adjutant collapsed into a pile of ashes. The flames didn't stop as they flew out of the room, one after another, forming a tall and burly Igor in midair. At that moment, he saw seagulls flying around him. All of them had a human head without any facial features, their heads bare. Igor let out a secret grunt as a blazing flame surrounded him before he sent towards the strange seagulls at high speeds. At that moment, he heard the sound of metal rubbing against each other and immediately looked over with the help of the soldiers. When he saw this, his body suddenly turned cold. He couldn't help but feel a sense of horror. On one of the ships on the other sail-powered battleship of the Sonia Sea Fleet, the cannons seemed to come alive and had a life of their own. They turned around and aimed into the air. As for the cannonballs, they actively leaped into the cannons. Boom! 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 The moment these shells were fired, they were struck by fireballs that followed different trajectories, exploding prematurely mid-flight. Seizing this opportunity, Igor quickly recited the honorific name of the highest commander in the Sonia Sea Theater, a weather warlock from the royal family. The ruler of the fog of the battlefield, the symbol of weather flux, the totem of the storm and lightning, the great Awatoma Einhorn. This was also the reason why it was difficult to kill a demigod of the same level when an advanced warning was given. They could always find an opportunity to seek help. Of course, the main goal of the attacker, Klein, was to create a bizarre scene to scare a demigod and help him digest his potion. He had no intention of completing the hunt. Upon seeing this, he hid beneath the water. Having achieved his goal, he immediately got Konas and Inuni to swap locations over to him and teleport away with them. As for Igor, he didn't let his guard down. He remained extremely tense and guarded against any possible attacks. Only when the angel responded did he truly heave a sigh of relief. Following that, Igor didn't let the fleet stay any longer. He abandoned the sail-powered battleship that had turned into an urban myth, and he left those waters. After a while, a seagull flew over and landed on the sail-powered battleship that had regained its silence. The seagull had obvious dark eye circles. It looked around and said in the language of humans, "I can smell the aura of a seer demigod."